Hi, my name is Rob Garrison. I'm the CEO of Mercado. Welcome to the 5th edition of First Things First, where we introduce you to supply chain thought leaders from media, from industry, and from venture. Last month's guest was Mark Seal. Mark's the VP of sourcing for Emser Tile. And Mark and I discussed many of the challenges he had all throughout the pandemic, but more importantly, a lot of the innovations that he created to overcome those challenges. It was a great podcast. Mark has done everything to keep the flow moving and continues to do that at Emser Supply Chain. So I hope they can listen to this really good podcast in terms of how to overcome some of these challenges. Today's guest, I'm excited to announce, is Debbie Ryan. Debbie's the Director of Procurement for LogicSource, and LogicSource helps your company increase profits through better buying. Debbie's had an incredible career in the supply chain industry, and I know you'll enjoy hearing her story. So that's coming up. Congratulations to Joaquin Mahumain for being the recipient of our episode 4 donation to the Let's Talk Supply Chain Diversity Pledge. We'll be donating $100 to this great cause again this month. And so please at that point chime in and any questions we'd love to answer. We'd love to have your comments, and we'll pick one of you from the audience for the Let's Talk Supply Chain Diversity Pledge. Okay, so now let's dive into a segment that we call the Fastest Five. So today's hot topic is it's classic supply and demand. Too much supply and not enough demand. That's a direct quote from the CEO of Macy's, Jeff Gennette, which leads me to my first article by Suzanne Kapner of the Wall Street Journal. Shout out to Suzanne. Her article talks about how many retailers, including, Walmart, Gap, Kohl's, Abercrombie, American Eagle, and Urban Outfitters are all sitting on too much inventory. And it looks like they're going to have to increase the number of discounts to get rid of that inventory and clear out the excess, and or store the goods to sell at a more opportune time later down the road. The second article is by the Associated Press, and it focuses on much the same issues, but primarily related to Target. The headline says, Target slashing prices to clear out inventory. Goes on to say Target is canceling orders from suppliers and it's slashing prices further to clear out and masking inventory ahead of the critical fall and holiday seasons ahead. So let's talk for a minute about the 5 root causes of these massive inventory misses from lots and lots of companies. Not just retailers, anybody who's importing really was facing these challenges this season. One simple reason is that the cost of inventory has gone up due to inflation. So even if you had the same amount of goods, the cost of the inventory rose because inflation hit everybody who imports just like it did us as consumers. So the cost of their inventory on hand is more expensive than it was when they purchased it. Second is a pronounced spending shift. And so as we all know, we're kind of moving away from focusing on things that made us and our homes more comfortable. We spent a lot of time at home, so we were focused on purchasing things like joggers, sweatsuits, gas grills, big TVs, anything that made our lives more comfortable as we stayed at home during the pandemic. Now that we've moved into endemic territory, people are spending their money more on services. They want to get out of the house, and so they're spending money on things like travel and leisure and entertainment, like even going to the movies, but particularly dinner is a big category. The third thing is a decrease in spending due to an increase in the cost of non-discretionary items like groceries. So this one in particular caught a lot of retailers by surprise because of the speed. We had been kind of told initially that this might be transitory and initially that it might not be that bad. And of course, inflation is going through the roof. And so now everybody that had disposable incomes is having to spend more of that disposable income on non-discretionary goods like groceries. So that's the third reason. And then the fourth is less stimulus. Most of the government stimulus has expired, meaning less available disposable income. And then the last one is that we're all super familiar with, which is the unpredictability of the supply chain. So when you're trying to forecast your inventory from 6 months ago for what's going to happen today, you're doing your best to plan it, but when something comes up like an unexpected port delay or certainly a factory shutting down or even a whole region shutting down like Shanghai, your inventory could arrive much earlier than you anticipated because you planned more and you didn't have all the delays, or it could arrive much later than you anticipated because you had more delays than you expected. So those are the 5 root causes leading to all these inventory misses. And by most of these forecasts, they're talking about it taking at least another quarter, possibly 2, to get it course corrected. Okay, so now I'd love to welcome Debbie Ryan to the podcast. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, how are you?
I'm doing great. So
Good.
Debbie, listen, you've had, as I mentioned in my opening, an amazing career. I've got to see some of it firsthand. Debbie and I worked together at APL and Kmart, for example. But I'd love to have you kind of share with the audience, Debbie, your background and kind of how you made it through this crazy journey that you've been on.
Sure. Yeah. As I think you know, I started out my career on the transportation services provider side of the industry, initially in LTL as a trainee with Big R.
I did not know that, actually.
You did not know that?
No, I did not know
that. Yep. Trainee for Big R, and then a line haul dispatcher, and then sales rep. So worked at a bunch of terminals, ended up in California, met some APL liner folks, and joined the APL liner team in Southern California. Remember the C10s had just come out, and importing was really starting to take off. So I worked both at liner and then at ACS, APL Logistics, their overseas 3PL. So, and then after that time immersed on the service provider side of the business, I sort of jumped over to the shipper side of the desk. And I worked mostly in retailing, a wide variety of retailers. So specialty retailers like Warner Brothers Studio Stores and Ascena Retail, big box like Kmart, and even off-pricers like Filing's Basement, which I miss dearly, and Value City department stores. So more recently, I tried out manufacturing over at Abbott, and most recently have decided to kind of leverage my experience working with a procurement consultant. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, so I wasn't kidding. That is an amazing journey through the supply chain. So you've seen lots of things, and maybe you could share with the audience, if you look at all of that background, maybe all the way from the beginning to when you were interning at an LTL company, all the way to fast forward to Abbott and what you're doing today. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face in your career when you think about the entirety of dealing in the supply chain industry?
Yeah, and there are so many, and over time they have changed constantly. But I kind of bucket them a couple of different ways. So one, there's the external challenges that you face, like market forces. Just as you were talking about, supply and demand of ocean slots, right? It takes about 3 years to build a steamship. A lot could change in the market in that time. You could be flooded with ocean slots, or you could be, wanting, just the availability of air charters, truckloads and driver situations, labor situations, right? I think we all have tattoos of ILWU contract years on our forearms. Right. But then, other external challenges like weather, the tsunami, or who could forget the volcano in Iceland?
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Right. It just stymied air freight for weeks. And just the normal stuff like typhoons and hurricanes and stuff. But also regulation, another external challenges. Many of us have fond memories of the old shipping conferences, but deregulation happens. But then there's also the internal challenges too that you face with your with your importer. Like the one thing that's dramatically impacted retail apparel has been the speed to market, fast fashion trend, which brought about a lot of changes in sourcing locations, right? Just from North Asia all through South Asia, West Asia. And it seemed like, those sourcing changes would happen, and then the infrastructure in those places would catch up a few years later, right?
And then they switch again to the next country, right? Yeah.
And then they switch again to the next country, right? Just, and I'm thinking of, remember what Hong Kong was like before Yantian was a big port, like,
I do.
Way back in the early 90s, and the long lines of trucks waiting to get across. So, but kind of chasing those sourcing locations, and then just customer demand, right? And the product line that the retailer is planning on selling. I remember a time at Warner Brothers Studio Stores one year the big product was these great big giant pillows for kids to sit on with like a Bugs Bunny or whatever. So very volumetric cargo, right? We signed a big contract, and the next year the hot item was Pokemon cards.
Teeny tiny cards, yeah.
So we went from 1,200 Fs down to like 500 or something, and it just because of the change in the and as in transportation and logistics, you kind of have to stay ahead of that as much as you can.
Well, that's going to lead me to my next two questions. So it's amazing to hear, you reminded me of lots of stories in terms of the challenges. So that's one thing I think we liked about it. But I want to start with, how did you deal with all those challenges? Was it just experience that got you through that? Or did you have tools, or was it mentors? Just for the people who are starting out their journey, I don't think the supply chain has changed that much. It's still wild and unpredictable. How do you learn this business? How do you deal with all these challenges? Because obviously you've successfully navigated that for many, many years.
Yeah, I think it helps to be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and just be inspired and motivated, and want to get up and come to work every day by all of the constant changes. But you really have to talk to people and dive in and learn this stuff to whatever extent you can. And transportation and logistics is unique in a company. It kind of sits in the middle of a whole lot of things, right? So you've got your merchandise planning and allocation, you've got design and sourcing and things like that, you've got finance, distribution, blah blah blah. And to whatever extent you can reach out and partner with all of those groups, or I love to see kind of cross-pollination. Hire somebody from the shipping department to come and be a transportation analyst, and kind of share those, build relationships cross-functionally, and just learn from each other. But I have to say, this is an incredibly generous industry too. That we share freely. Think of all of the conferences. I can think of 5 people right now I could call and say, hey, if I needed to store 100 trailers in Bond in Southern California, right?
Yeah. I think everybody's 5 degrees of separation for sure. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then what about things you didn't like in the industry? I mean, there's been, to your point, it's really exciting. It's very diverse. It's great for adrenaline junkies. How about the flip side? Is there anything that you dislike about the supply chain industry? Anything you'd like to see different?
Yeah. You always want to think that you can nudge things along, that there's certain things that you can change. And I guess the things that are difficult are, just these chronic problems that nobody seems to be able to get their hands around. Like, I'm thinking of the chassis situation and getting things quickly in and out of the piers and things like that. That just seem to be chronic problems year after year. It's more of a frustration that we can't all put our heads together and solve that kind of problem. And we always wish we had earlier notice about things going on. And, we've always joked, we're the last ones to know that somebody started sourcing in Cambodia, right? Yeah,
that's right. What do they say? Something rolls downhill.
Exactly. Yeah. Just a booking pops up and you're like, oh, that's cool.
When you think, Debbie, about all the different things you've done, as you mentioned, you've kind of been on the domestic for a short time, you've been on the carrier side, you worked for retailers, you worked for manufacturers. Which one of those did you find the most rewarding? Or did you like all of them for different reasons? I'm just kind of curious, when you look at that diversity of your experience, was there one thing that really stood out as, I loved being in retail, for example, or I loved being in manufacturing?
I would say not an industry per se, but an atmosphere. I think when I was at Ascena Retail, the company was growing by acquisition. So every couple of years, there was a project to incorporate some new brands. And it was an opportunity to do network optimization studies. It was an opportunity to rethink all of your contracts, ocean, parcel, everything. Just an opportunity to kind of a little bit start from scratch and draw your perfect network or your perfect operation, kind of from the ground up. And I personally, I just found that very engaging. That every few years there was an opportunity to kind of rethink your network in its entirety, and maybe do some things that you didn't have the scale to do before. Or the new acquisition has a distribution center in Maryland. Oh, what can we do with that? Just
Debbie, you do realize it sounds a little bit crazy that you like things changing constantly. Some people like them to stay the same. So it says a lot about your personality. And I recall that from working together at Kmart, for sure. That no amount.
That.
Yeah. There couldn't have been too much whirlwind for you. So I'm gonna take you on a different path, since you've done domestic and importing. There's a lot of talk about, that with all the challenges that we've seen the last couple of years in the supply chain, particularly in the import supply chain. There's a lot of talk about, why is this stuff made offshore? I mean, this is the most basic question. Why don't we make it here in the United States? You just most recently worked for Abbott, obviously a large manufacturer in the United States. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you have any thoughts on that in terms of whether you think production will start to come back either near shore or onshore? Because all I've ever known, and I think all you've ever known, is that most of the stuff that we consume has been manufactured offshore. So it would be a really significant change. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, broadly, I don't see things massively, coming back to the United States for manufacturing. I mean, you just have to look at the profit margins, and you've seen them, what you can manufacture for in Vietnam or China or places like that. And I can't see a situation that would come about unless it was catastrophic, where people would say, we're going to set aside those profit margins and, make in the United States. Now, I do think that there may be some strategic shifts, right? I'm in Ohio. They just announced a giant new Intel plant on the east side of Columbus. So, I can see things like those type of products where there's a security strategy or something like that, or something that we should be able to do, where our technology can be better than something that we import. For example, clean energy manufacturing, wind turbines and solar panels and things like that. But I don't see things like socks coming out. I don't know why I just thought of socks, but I don't see things like that coming back, because it's almost economics 101, right? Things will seek the lowest cost of production. So, and the costs are so much lower. Now, if those costs come up dramatically, and there's a little bit more of a level playing field, but I think it's really all about the profit.
Well, I'll share another controversial thought, and maybe just get your opinion on this. I used to guest lecture at SMU, and I would always get one question about this, why sourcing in China or all these controversial things. And I used to keep a picture in my presentation, and there was a bunch of people working over sewing machines, but it was from New York in 1930.
Yeah.
I always kind of wondered too, if we haven't progressed up the manufacturing ladder to where to where we want to be creating things in this country that are either important to security, which, as you mentioned, or a high value, where we can pay people really great wages and work in a really safe environment. So how do you think about that? Do you think that's another sort of reason for, Adam Smith said, don't make for your family what you can have made cheaper by others. So sort of as a global economy today, maybe we look at the United States as we stay on the high end of the manufacturing scale, where we can have the safest, cleanest, most high-paying jobs.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I think we pick and choose. I mean, there may be a reason for making in America, that could be your niche, right? All of our clothes, all of our suits, all of our dresses made in America. That's a marketing angle, or it could be a creativity angle. We know how to create for the American market better than anyone anywhere else, and I can see some distinct, unique situations where that would work. Sure.
So you don't see a massive shift, but maybe for certain industries, certain things, it makes sense.
Yeah. And I think and it's got to be a strategic reason, like a marketing angle, or like a security reason or something like that. That it would come here. So
last question, as we close out here, if you were starting out in the supply chain industry today, like today was going to be you're just out of college, ready to go in the supply chain industry, or you're advising somebody considering supply chain, how would you counsel them, or what would you think about? Would there be anything you did differently, or is there anything you'd recommend differently to somebody just starting out?
I wouldn't have said that to young me starting out my career, but I would certainly say it to people in school right now. Hone your analytical chops, because supply chain really runs on data and analytics. I mean, things are micro timed and synchronized and things like that. And it really runs on data and analytics. And, the more skilled you are at doing those kind of things, those are great entry points into finance or transportation analytics, distribution analytics, planning, things like that. Really have those things in your backpack. And then also, try and resist getting pigeonholed. be a hopper. So, I was saying earlier that supply chain sits at the center of so many different functions. So the more you know about those, the better you can be. So, if you've been a couple years as a assistant in merchandise planning and allocation, see if there's there's a lot of transferable skills from that type of role to a transportation analyst role, right? Or distribution wave planner or something like that. There are definitely transferable skills there. Break into supply chain or transportation finance. Be great to do a little tour in compliance and trade, right? Get to know fulfillment. And I think if you can, kind of plot out a career moving through these different disciplines, I think you will, and along the way, you may find that, hey, I'm sticking with trade compliance because, this is where I really found a home. So
why do you think it requires so many more analytics? Would you say that has to do with the shift to e-commerce, just that the supply chain itself has gotten incredibly more complicated? It used to be you offloaded in a container and you moved it into a big distribution center to go to a big pool distributor to go to a store. And now it can go anywhere, anytime. Yeah. Do you think that's the biggest change that's causing the need for all that much deeper analysis than we've done in the past?
Yeah. And actually, I think a lot of the low hanging fruit is all gone. And now
that's true too.
Right. And if you're going to find things that'll save you half a penny a unit or something like that. And it's going to, I think it just requires that, deeper analytics, and you're always looking for options, always looking for risk assessment, things like that. And I think that requires a lot of the analytics piece too. So.
Yeah, I love your recommendation about diversity too. I think that's one of the things that I've seen as a challenge is people do tend to get pigeonholed in their space, and then it's very difficult for them to see the broader picture. So I think that was excellent advice as well.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting the high sign here, Debbie. All right. Unfortunately, our time here has ended. I want to thank you though before we go, because Debbie threatened me that she was going to tell some stories about us in our earlier career days, and so fortunately, she didn't whip any of those stories out. For another podcast, maybe we can talk about how things used to be. Just before we let you go, we've got one question, Debbie, that was related to possibly sourcing shifts. And I spoke a lot about domestic, but I also meant nearshoring. And so there's a question here about South America. Do you have any background in that, or how do you think about that as a sourcing location?
I have never understood why we couldn't, we couldn't get some folks into, especially Central America. I remember, it was probably 10 years ago. I remember some, I want to say Korean factories going into Guatemala and places like that. And,
Sure.
with the cost of ocean transportation being so high now, I think this is sad to say, I think the only enemy of development in Central America is, what if those ocean containers come down to $1,100 again from Asia to the West Coast? And, but I've never understood why we don't get more development in Central America. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. So, and I'm with you. The only thing I could think of, Debbie, for Central and South America in terms of what I've seen is when you and I watched sort of China come up, they didn't just invest in importing, they invested the infrastructure to go with it. They're very, very efficient. And so that's another thing I just think for consideration is how efficient are things in Central and South America? Could they keep up with the efficiency, particularly in China? That's another consideration, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I know. I remember on my last job looking for northbound routes for product from Mexico, and we were looking at ocean because truck was so challenging.
Yeah.
But was the infrastructure there to support it? Yeah.
That's it. Okay. Well, Debbie, thank you very much. It was great to catch up with you again.
You too. And
we'll talk soon. Okay. So that was great. Hopefully everybody enjoyed hearing from and learning from Debbie. She's an amazing, amazing person. So I'm going to close the show talking about some of the stuff that I see on a broader scale that I covered at the beginning when we talked about some of the challenges that people are having keeping up with inventory. I'm going to zoom the lens out. So Nicole, if you could put up the first slide here, I just want to quickly go through some of my thoughts on a deeper scale or on a wider scale, some of the challenges that I see. And like Debbie, I've been doing this a long time. I've been in the industry for 30 plus years now. And, all of this is coming together for me over this long period of time on what I think is needed next. So when we look at the supply chain, the import supply chain, it's not widely understood. And sometimes I'm not sure why. I've spent my whole career in it, so I know it pretty deeply, but it's a massive, massive industry. So the first thing I put up here was just some statistics for those of you who don't know. In the United States, we have about 225,000 imports who purchase about $2.1 trillion worth of goods from abroad each year. So that's just the U.S. Globally, trade across borders is about an $8 trillion industry. Europe's roughly the same size from an importation standpoint as the United States, so they also import about 2.1 trillion. And when you look at the piece to the right, there's a massive disconnect between the size and the sophistication and the complexity of this industry and how it works today. So we've been calling it a supply chain, but I almost look at it as supply links. And so what you see there in gray, these are the critical activities that have to occur in synchronization to make a supply chain work, from planning your imports to purchasing your product and moving your product. And right now they're kind of disconnected and mostly analog. And I'm going to talk about those two things in just a second here. But if you look on the right, that transformation has occurred on what I call the final mile, which is the point in pink there. Retailers have done a great job connecting their domestic networks to their consumers, making it available to purchase, 24/7, dropped at your door, pick up in store, buy online, pick up in store. All those configurations that we used to call omnichannel have occurred. So that one link in the supply chain is highly digital, highly connected. But the first mile, which is where the products come from, is highly disconnected. So Nicole, if you go to the next slide, I just kind of talk about these two pieces in a little bit more detail. So when we talk about what's disconnected, and I talk about a complex import supply chain, this is what it looks like. On average, it takes imports about 7 months to go from planning stage, about a month in that process, all the way through manufacturing. That takes about 4 months, importation clearance. So this is from purchase order plan to DC delivered is about 7 months. And if you look in those first two columns, there's lots of different folks that have to come together, lots of entities. I list a few of them there, and there's lots of departments that need to connect to make that happen. So the first thing is sort of this disconnected network. And then if you go to the next slide, please. The last thing I'll highlight here in the 30 seconds or 60 seconds I've got left is the technology landscape. This is the other big disconnect. Most importers have really good systems to plan their orders. You see those on the left-hand side. They've got demand planning systems. They use their ERP, and they've got really good systems to fulfill their orders, as we saw in that that red pink oval at the beginning slide, but they don't have any systems to manage the middle piece, the execution of those orders. That 7 months is still largely done via Excel and email. So in my estimation, the next big opportunity in supply chain is for people to digitize their supply chains and to connect their supply chains. When we do those things, it'll be much easier for us to contend with all these crazy challenges that we've been talking about and seeing throughout the market. So more to come on this, but thank you very much for your time. And we'll talk to you next month on the next episode of First Things First.